The resource nexus on the ground is all about the everyday politics of resource allocation, consumption, on the ground. That's literally what it is, because we looked at this issue of natural resource competition and, from the interstate level and also the market level, but we realized there was a huge piece missing because a large percentage of the world's population, 1 to 5 billion, depending on how you measure it, struggles every day with the daily questions, the daily politics of gaining access to natural resources. So in this part of our kind of analytical framework, we try and understand how these everyday politics play out, whether it be in cities, whether it be in the countryside, whether it be in the global south, in the poorest parts of the world, or even in the global north. In the United States, for example, we look at a case study of shale gas production in Texas competing for water during a period of drought last summer in 2011 with agricultural production. So these everyday politics are important for a number of reasons, not least of which because these everyday politics can actually bubble up to become issues of transnational concern and of concern to the transatlantic community. Migration is a coping mechanism, and it's not just related to natural resources. I mean, people move for a variety of reasons. But in our research and in this project, we isolated migration as something that often does have natural resource competition as one of the causal features. There are a number of examples for this. Land tenure and land rights in places like sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America are tied to a number of factors. Climate change can impact someone's ability to grow food. The interference of outside forces, whether it be people buying up land to grow biofuel crops, or mining companies, oil and gas production, these sorts of things can impact sort of the quotidian lives of people on the ground, their ability to grow food and their ability to make a living. And one of the coping mechanisms that is often used, of course, is migration. This can include what we call rural to urban migration, where people move from land where they're not able to make it work for their families for whatever reason, and they move to the cities. Or it can be transnational migration, which is something that we're well accustomed to in the transatlantic community. And in fact, we attempt to cope with this in our own way. Recently, since 2000, there have been a number of fences and walls built. And that's our way, that has been our way. That's been a policy response to people attempting to move from their circumstances to more potentially fruitful and promising circumstances here in the transatlantic community. We think this trend will continue, the trend of both people picking up and moving because they can't make it work where they are as a result largely of resource competition, and our attempts to try and cope with it and deal with it here in the transatlantic community by attempting to slow down or stop that migration. Cities magnify the challenges of the resource nexus. We live in an urban century. We live in an urban millennium, presumably. More than 50% of the world's population lives in cities now, and that trend line is continuing to increase. And in cities, you see some of the sort of the rawest, if you will, struggles over access to clean water, over access to food, over access to fuel, particularly in the burgeoning cities of the global south. So if you think of a Mumbai, if you think of a Belo Horizonte, if you think of a Chongqing, that's not to say that all of those cities are in the same category in terms of the struggles that they face, but we think that the resource nexus is very visible in these large and burgeoning cities in the global south. The transatlantic community is well equipped because of our own experience and our own history to help with the challenges of the resource nexus on the ground. That's not to say that we've done everything right, either in North America or in Europe, in terms of dealing with problems such as migration or particularly of urbanization. But we've learned a lot from our own mistakes. If you think of growth management, which there's lots of expertise both in North America as well as in Europe in terms of managing growth, in terms of providing sewer and water access to large cities, in terms of encouraging density in particular ways to lower resource consumption, in terms of making smart policies to avoid the conflicts that sometimes arise over natural resources. If you think of a city like Jakarta, for example, in Indonesia, where about 25% of the population is connected to fresh water, running fresh water, and only about 2 to 3% is connected to sewer. This is an issue that we dealt with here in the transatlantic community 100 or more years ago when we realized that many of the problems we were facing, disease, et cetera, were caused by a lack of access to these things. We have expertise here at our universities and in our cities that we feel that it would be useful to have an honest conversation and to share experiences. That's not to say it's a one-way street where it's us telling them, but rather a conversation where we think that they can learn from our mistakes and we can, maybe empathize and sympathize with some of the challenges they face in the scale of urbanization and the scale of problems that they face with this resource nexus on the ground.